it's becoming like a theme amongst lunatics on the left. She's saying it. Don Lemon said something similar the other day. Maybe we'll start with him, and then we'll play what Joy Reid just said. But they need a serious reality check. Here he is.
So my question this morning is, white men, are you okay? Are you okay? You're sending troops, National Guard to cities. You keep talking about, oh my gosh, Chicago and black on black crime. Because this country keeps waking up to bodies in the pews, blood on the floor, every single time. The face behind the trigger looks nearly the same. These shooters, again and again and again and again, look just like their base. We hear about anything but the culture of grievance and violence that the right has been feeding for decades. Something is cracked deep inside when so many of you believe the answer to fear, to loss, to change is violence. Are you listening to me? I hope I'm saying it loud enough for the people in the back.
Okay, so it's white men who he says are the problem in America. That'll be news to his husband, who happens to be a white man. And Don Lemon thinks that the white community needs to look at itself because we're producing the killers. We're a violent community. Just FYI, the National Institute of Justice in 2022 did an analysis of the latest 172 mass shootings, showed that they were 52% white, 20.9% black, 8.1% Latino, and 6.4% Asian. Okay, so whites made up the majority, 52%, and blacks had 20% of the mass shootings, even though they're only 6% of the population, black men. On top of that, Don Lemon conveniently excludes from his analysis what we're seeing when it comes to gang violence. And by the way, so do all of the stats. No stat that puts together who's committing the violence in America counts gang violence. And I say this almost eerily, Glenn, because it's a point that Charlie Kirk had literally just made before they shot him. That was a point he was raising about who's committing the mass shootings, that we don't have all the accurate data because they exclude gang violence. And moments later, his life was taken. It's not just Don Lemon. Here's Joy Reid on a show called BET Talks. It's 30 minutes long. The entire thing has music under it, which is a very strange thing. Nothing telegraphs this is not a news show more than putting music under all 30 minutes of your interview. Here's that in SOT 25.
Somebody says black on black crime, we need to correct them.
Immediately.
Especially if we're in media. Yeah, no, that's just called crime.
Yeah.
If a person commits a crime, it's just crime. Because when a white person hurts another white person, well, then that's white on white crime. And maybe we need to start pointing it out. There's a pathology that's happening in this country that is not happening among black folks. This is a crisis in their community, but you don't see black commentators saying, we need you all to sit down and start to look at your culture. You need to think about what's happening in your culture. But when you have a crime that a black person commits, we get lectured as to whether we need to look at hip hop. We need to think about whether our children are being raised poorly by single moms. We need to ask that same question of them. They're the majority. They commit the majority of crimes. They commit the majority of mass shootings, rapes, and sexual assaults and assaults against children.
Right.
We should start asking the same question in reverse.
Okay, so none of that was true. Whites do not commit the majority of crime as a population, as a percentage of crime. She's going by sheer numbers because whites are still the majority in America, but blacks commit over 60% of the violent crime in America, despite the fact that they're only 13% of the population. And by the way, it's not really black women who are doing it. It's mostly black men who are cut that in half, 6.5% of the population, commit over 60% of the violent crime in America. That's what's true. There are all sorts of reasons for it that the left won't be honest about. But yeah, fatherless homes is a big piece of it. And gang violence is a big piece of it. 91% of black homicide victims, 91% were killed by other blacks. That's the truth. The vast, vast majority of Black homicide victims are killed by other Black people. Heather McDonald, who's like an encyclopedia when it comes to stats on this, points out that Black juveniles are now shot at 100 times the rate of white juveniles. Blacks between the ages of 10 and 24 die of gun homicide at nearly 25 times the rate of whites at that age. Shooters are overwhelmingly not the police and not whites, but other Blacks. In 2021, she goes on, 87% of all non-lethal interracial violent crimes were Black on white. 87%. 480,000 and change incidents with a Black offender and a white victim, 69,000 and change incidents with a white offender and a Black victim, or 7 times as many Black on white as white on Black. She says, in other words, whites have more to fear from Blacks than Blacks do from whites, a fact contrary to the race hustle narrative. There is no deep problem within the white community that we need to examine because of the massive numbers of whites killing other whites. I just like all of this is a rewriting of facts because they think it's part of like, I don't know, a DEI initiative to try to change the narrative. Everybody living in America understands that Black people are not inherently violent, that violence in America is not the fault of Black people. But if you're going to make an issue out of race when it comes to crime, then we are going to have to talk about the stats, and they don't reflect well on, in particular, Black men.
You know, there's so much going on there, Megyn. And just by the way, you know, Joy Reid said, none of us ever try and tell them that they're the ones who have the race problem. And just like 10 seconds earlier, we listened to Don Lemon saying, hey, white men, you're the ones with the problem of violence. You're the ones who are going around killing everybody. And I know you kind of briefly mentioned the fact that Don Lemon is married to a white man, but I just want to focus in on that for a second because like I was long associated with the left for the first like decade or a little more of my journalism, not entirely, but primarily. And one of the things that began to alienate me most was this constant need to talk about people based on which group they belong to and what that means about in terms of their group membership and what rights and what prerogatives and what things you're allowed to say about some groups and not allowed to say about others. And this constant like divvying of people up and trying to divide them constantly and pit them against one another instead of treating people as individuals. And like part of the reason why it bothered me so much is because I have an interracial family. And like I don't want to have to think about the world in terms of like, oh, white people over here and Black people over here. Like this is the thing I thought that we were trying to fight against and trying to overcome. And then suddenly like the left starts embracing everything through this identity lens where now everything is a fight between groups like, no, you're more violent, you're more violent, you're more violent. And I have to say, like, I can't help but notice that a lot of times, like the people who are the worst race hustlers, like the ones who are constantly trying to be most incendiary with racial discourse, are people like Don Lemon, who's married to a white person, or people like Nicole Hannah-Jones, or like Wesley Lowery, who are, you know, have a white parent, who aren't 100% Black. A lot of it is like an identity crisis. And so they're constantly trying to overcompensate by saying, I'm a Black person, our problems are white people. And as you say, like everybody who lives in the American experience understands that, of course, there are large sectors of the United States that are predominantly Black where there is a massive crime problem. And a lot of these white liberals who want to deny that would never go walking in those neighborhoods at night precisely because they understand the truth, even if they want to deny it. Now, what does that mean? Maybe there's a socioeconomic element, which I think is true, that predominates, and a lot of Black neighborhoods are economically deprived and therefore more criminal. Whatever. I think what's so toxic about left-wing discourse, as we've just heard, is that overwhelmingly they're the ones, for whatever reason, like there's different reasons, psychological benefits, political benefits. I think a lot of it is just like anger and rage and resentment, who are constantly trying to insist that we shouldn't be judged as individuals, that not only are we understandable and defined by our group membership, but our rights and privileges and obligations are also determined by whatever group we belong to. And it goes across the line until you're finally like dividing everybody along these like micro levels, and nothing is injecting more division in our country than that kind of discourse. It makes me sick. And I think if we look at who does it, it's often very revealing in terms of what their lives are or who they are about why it is that they're doing it. Mm-hmm.
It's really disturbing too, because if you're going to play that game and you really want to get down to the identities of those who commit these shootings, I look forward to his trans analysis. I look forward to him taking a hard look at the number of shootings, mass shootings we've had over the past, let's just do the last 2 years, who had some sort of trans association, right? I mean, it's his side, the leftist FBI under Joe Biden, who tried to hide that stuff from us, like what was going on with the shooter in Nashville, Tennessee, at that school. And, you know, he wants to talk about, like, they look like MAGA. Oh, really? Did the Ascension school shooter look like MAGA? It was a trans person who saw a demon when they looked into the mirror. That was obviously a deranged lunatic who had fallen, unfortunately, into this bizarre ideology of the trans community and was actually living to regret it, according to his journals. But, like, there's not going to be an honest analysis. This is somebody who's just interested in dividing us by race, as you said. You know, it reminded me, I'm preparing this memo that I'm going to deliver on the air. I'm taking a hard look at the criticisms of Charlie, which I know to be untrue, and I'm basically just finding the evidence for what he was saying, and it's all there. But one of the things that jumped out at me, I love Shelby Steele. He's like a truly brilliant guy who is really honest about how we got here to this identity politics place where some people do what you just said. And he's really honest about the civil rights era and how his criticism of it is that it elevated blacks based on race. It like singled them out and gave them sort of victimhood status, this sort of recognized victimhood status based on race, as opposed to recognizing them based on humanity. That's what he said. And it was the beginning, as he sees it, of dividing each other that way, by race and so on, and that we've never recovered from it. We leaned into these identity politics and never recovered.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no denying the fact that if you look at history, I mean, of course, there were times when Black people were actually oppressed. Like, that was true victimhood. I mean, there's no denying that. There was no denying the fact that women at one point didn't have the right to vote, et cetera, et cetera. Within my lifetime, you know, just like as a person who grew up gay, like my life has radically changed from something that, like, you know, homosexuality was something that could never be mentioned. It was considered, you know, like such an evil sin that was implanted into the minds of every gay kid in a way that was damaging, through the fact that now we have complete and total equality for gay people up into and including same-sex marriage. And so then the question becomes, like, once you overcome these problems, do you want to stew in them forever? Do you want to insist that the trajectory of your life is one that's shaped and defined by your victimhood? Or do you want to insist that, okay, now that we've made this progress, now I'm emancipated from that. I don't need to think about that any longer. I don't need to, you know, focus on that any longer. That's no longer the part of the story of my life. And ultimately, I think so much about who we are as individuals is based upon whether we live in the present and whether we want to be emboldened as opposed to living in the past, and whether we want this victimhood label on our forehead forever, mostly to justify our own failures or to justify our bad behaviors or our anger and race and hatred and resentments. And, you know, just the fact that Don Lemon has to talk about the Trump movement as being white men, when there's huge numbers of white men who are like the hardest core, most radical leftists in Antifa and other places.
So
and
true.
Obviously there are huge numbers of non-white people who are in the Trump movement, very prominent in the Trump movement, who actually support Trump's deployment of troops into American cities. I'm not one of the people who support that, but there are, you know, to still talk about it that way. It's such a deceitful and distortive lens to pretend that the Trump movement is all white men and all white men are Trump supporters, that you just know there's other more nefarious things going on there.
Did you know gold is up around 40% this year? That's not speculation. That is reality. And if a portion of your savings is not diversified into gold, you're missing the boat. Here are the facts. Inflation, still too high. The U.S. dollar, still too weak. And the government debt is still growing. This is why central banks are flocking to gold. They're the ones driving prices up to record highs. But it's not too late to buy gold from Birch Gold Group and get in the door right now. Birch Gold will help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold. You don't pay a dime out of pocket. Just text MK to 989898 and claim your free info kit. There's no obligation. There's just useful information. The best indicator of the future is the past, and in this case, the present. Gold has historically been a safe haven, and it's doing gangbusters right now. So text MK to 989898 right now to claim your free info kit on gold. Text MK to 989898. Protect your future today with Birch Gold. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.